This question comes from Sam in Richfield, New Jersey. Could you help me understand the link between inflation and employment that Big Ben made during his press conference? He said something along the lines of inflation levels above a certain amount will spur job creation. How does inflation encourage employers to hire people?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, that's all a myth. I mean, there's something called the Phillips curve, which says that there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, that if you have too low inflation, then you'll have too much unemployment, and vice versa, and that somehow there's a trade-off, that we have to decide, well, if we want a little bit lower unemployment, we're going to have to tolerate a little higher inflation. All that is complete and utter nonsense, and unfortunately, Ben Bernanke and a lot of people believe it. But there is one way, and only one way, that creating inflation can lead to higher employment. And this does happen, and unfortunately, people confuse this with thinking that inflation is a way to create jobs. It's not. What happens is you have things like the minimum wage law in this country. And the minimum wage law obviously creates a lot of unemployment, because the minimum wage law says that if your skills are not up to a certain level, then it's illegal for you to work. Now, what happens is when the government creates a lot of inflation, the minimum wage actually goes down, because as prices rise, if the minimum wage stays the same, inflation erodes away the value of the minimum wage. And if you create enough inflation, the minimum wage comes down a lot. And reducing the minimum wage creates jobs. But that's not the best way to reduce the minimum wage. It's better to just reduce it by reducing it or eliminating it completely. But ultimately, if they create a lot of inflation, that also eliminates the minimum wage. And that's what creates jobs, because you're lowering wages. And if you think about supply and demand, if wages are going down, right, demand for labor will increase. You're going to hire more people if they're working for less money. But if the politicians put it in those terms, if they said there's a lot of unemployment, so our solution is to reduce everybody's pay by 25% or 50%, I don't think the public would sign on for that. And I don't think people want new jobs because the jobs are going to pay very little. And I don't think that people that are currently working want to have huge pay cuts in order to create more jobs. But unfortunately, that is what's happening. Now, if there's a lot of unemployment because wages are too high, wages need to come down. But it's much better to let them come down on their own than to bring them down through inflation and wipe out the savings of Americans. And, of course, inflation creates lots of other problems. But the real trade-off between unemployment is wages. And if wages are too high, there's unemployment. And if wages are too high, they have to come down. It's much better if they come down because government removes the barriers that are preventing them from coming down. But if politics prevent them from doing that, another way to reduce wages is to create inflation. And that will create jobs, but it's not the inflation, it's lower wages. And of course, if you create enough inflation, more people are going to need jobs. A lot of people who are retired might be forced to look for jobs because they've been wiped out. But there we're creating jobs that we'd rather not have. I'm sure the people who are retired would prefer to stay retired and play golf than having to work at some, bad job for low wages, because now they're broke because their retirement has been wiped out and they have to get some crap job just so they can eat.